The Angry Old Man. My name is Sarah. I worked as a nurse in a care home. There was one patient, Mr. Henderson, who yelled at everyone and refused to speak. I thought he was just a bitter old man, until I heard him playing a broken piano in the middle of the night. Working in a care home isn't just about medicine or schedules. It's about people. It's about stories that are almost finished. Sometimes those stories are difficult to read. We see the wrinkles, the anger, and the tired eyes, and we think we know who the person is. We use words like difficult, grumpy, or stubborn, but often those words are just a mask. Today, I want to tell you the story of Mr. Henderson. It's a story that changed how I look at every person I meet. As you listen, try to feel the atmosphere of the quiet hallways and the weight of the secrets people carry. Let's learn some beautiful human English together. The floor of St. Jude's care home always smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. It was a clean smell, but a lonely one. I started my shift at 7 in the morning. My first task was always the same: room 402. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," I said, trying to keep my voice bright. I pushed the heavy cart into his room. The curtains were closed and the air felt heavy. "Leave it on the table and get out," a gravelly voice snapped from the shadows. Mr. Henderson was sitting in his armchair. He was 84 years old, with skin like thin parchment and hands that were always curled into tight defensive fists. He didn't look at me. He never looked at me. He just stared out at the tiny sliver of light coming through the curtains. "I need to check your blood pressure first," I said gently. I moved closer with the cuff. He pulled his arm away as if my touch burned him. "I said, get out! You're all the same. Poking, prodding. Leave me in peace." I sighed. My heart felt a little heavy, but I didn't let it show. This was my 3rd month with him, and I hadn't seen him smile once. To the other nurses, he was the grump. To the doctors, he was a non-compliant patient. I placed his medicine tray on the nightstand. "I'll come back in an hour, Mr. Henderson. Please try to eat your toast." "Tastes like cardboard," he muttered, finally turning his head. His eyes were a pale, piercing blue, but they were filled with a cold, sharp anger. As I walked down the hall, I heard the sound of a plastic tray hitting the floor. I didn't need to look back to know he had pushed his breakfast off the table again. That was my life for months. A cycle of insults, rejected meals, and a heavy silence that followed me home. I wondered why someone could be so full of hate. I wondered if he had ever loved anything at all. But then, the nights started getting colder, and the halls of the care home grew even quieter. And that was when the music began. Sarah is trying to show empathy, even when her patient is being unkind. Have you ever had to be patient with someone who was very angry? A few weeks passed. The routine was exhausting, but I began to notice small things, details I had missed because I was too protecting my own feelings from his insults. One afternoon I was cleaning the common room. A soft, classical melody was playing on the radio in the background. It was a simple Mozart piece. I looked over at Mr. Henderson. He was sitting in his usual chair by the window, but he wasn't staring blankly this time. His right hand was resting on the arm of the chair. His long, thin fingers were moving. Tap, 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 tap. He was following the rhythm perfectly, not just the beat, but the subtle changes in the music. When the melody grew faster, his fingers flew across the fabric of the chair as if it were made of ivory keys. His eyes were closed, and for a split second the deep lines of anger on his forehead smoothed out. He looked peaceful. "You like this song, don't you?" I whispered, almost afraid to break the spell. His eyes snapped open. The piece vanished, replaced instantly by that familiar, jagged wall of ice. He pulled his hand back and tucked it under his other arm. "It's noise," he barked. "Turn it off. It's distracting and loud." "But your hands, Mr. Henderson. You were playing along." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "I was scratching an itch, girl. Don't go imagining things. Now, where is my tea? It's 3 minutes late." I walked away, but I didn't believe him. There was a muscle memory in those fingers that didn't come from scratching an itch. It was the movement of someone who had spent thousands of hours in conversation with a piano. I started paying closer attention. I noticed how he winced when the medicine trolley squeaked in a high pitch. I noticed how he would hum 3 specific notes under his breath when he thought no one was listening. A sad, haunting little phrase that sounded like a question without an answer. The revelation happened on a Tuesday. I was working the night shift, which was always the loneliest time at St. Jude's. The lights were dimmed, and the only sound was the hum of the vending machine and the occasional distant cough of a sleeping resident. Around 2 a.m. I heard a sound. It wasn't a cough or a groan, it was a piano. In the far corner of the dining hall sat an old upright piano. It was out of tune, the wood was scratched, and 2 of the keys were permanently stuck. We usually kept a lace cloth and a vase of plastic flowers on top of it. No one ever played it. I walked toward the hall, my soft rubber shoes making no noise on the linoleum. The room was dark, lit only by the pale moonlight spilling through the high windows. A figure was sitting at the bench. He was hunched over, his shoulders rising and falling with heavy breaths. Then he began to play. It wasn't the simple Mozart from the radio. It was something massive, something that felt like a storm breaking over a dark ocean. Despite the broken keys and the dusty strings, the music was breathtaking. It was full of a deep, aching longing that made my throat tighten. I stayed in the shadows watching. It was Mr. Henderson. He wasn't the angry old man anymore. His movements were fluid and powerful. He played with a desperate intensity, his head swaying, his eyes shut tight. When he hit a chord, he didn't just press the keys, he poured his entire soul into them. Suddenly, he hit one of the broken keys. It made a dull, thudding sound instead of a note. The music stopped instantly. The silence that followed was even louder than the song. Mr. Henderson let out a sob, a raw, broken sound that shattered my heart. He slammed his fists onto the keys in frustration, creating a dissonant crash, and then buried his face in his hands. "I can't," he whispered into the empty room. "I can't even find the ending anymore." The next morning, I didn't mention the piano. I knew that if I confronted him directly, he would retreat back behind his wall of anger. Instead, I went to the basement where the old archives were kept. I spent my lunch break digging through dusty boxes of records from the 1970s and 80s. Finally, I found it. A yellowed newspaper clipping with a black and white photograph. The man in the photo was young, with the same piercing blue eyes and long, elegant fingers. The headline read, "The Golden Hands, Arthur Henderson Captivates London." I read the article with a lump in my throat. Arthur hadn't just been a musician, he had been a prodigy. But as I scrolled through later records, the story darkened. There was a car accident. A rainy night. Arthur had survived. But his wife and young daughter, who often travelled with him to his concerts, had not. He hadn't just lost his family that night, he had lost the reason he played. He had disappeared from the public eye, selling his grand piano and moving into a small apartment, eventually ending up here, at St. Jude's, with nothing but a bitter heart and a mind that was beginning to fail him. The anger I saw every day wasn't hate. It was grief that had never been allowed to heal. It was the sound of a man screaming at a world that had taken everything beautiful from him. I knew I couldn't fix his past, but I could acknowledge his soul. The next day, I didn't bring just the medicine tray. Tucked under my arm was a folder of vintage sheet music I had printed out, the exact concerto mentioned in the newspaper clipping. I entered room 402. Mr. Henderson was staring at the wall, his breakfast untouched. "Go away, Sarah," he said, but his voice sounded tired today, not sharp. "I found something," I said softly. I placed the sheet music on his lap. He looked down. I watched his eyes scan the notes. His breathing hitched. His thumb trembled as it touched the paper, tracing the staff lines as if they were a map to a home he had forgotten. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. His voice was cracked, stripped of all its armor. "I know who you are, Arthur," I said, using his first name for the first time. "And I know why you play in the dark. But the piano in the hall, it's broken. It's not worthy of you." He looked up at me, and for the first time he actually saw me. The ice in his eyes had melted into a deep, watery sadness. "It doesn't matter," he said, his voice shaking. "My hands, they forget. My mind, it's like a radio losing its signal. I start a piece and then the music just vanishes." "Then we will find it together," I said, one note at a time. I spent the next week coming in early and staying late. I called a piano tuner, an old friend of mine, who agreed to fix the upright in the hall for free. I brought Arthur recordings of his own performances from decades ago. At first, he resisted. He cried. He yelled. But slowly the music began to win. He started practicing in the afternoons, no longer hiding in the dark. The other residents would stop in the hallway, leaning on their walkers, listening to the ghost of a genius returning to life. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the scene. The hallway is quiet, smelling of floor wax and old wood. Then the first note hits. It's clear and sharp. You hear the mechanical click of the piano keys and the heavy, rhythmic breathing of an old man finding his purpose again. The music isn't just a sound, it's a physical force that makes the air feel warmer. 6 months passed. The transformation in room 402 was nothing short of a miracle. Arthur Henderson didn't just play the piano, he came back to the world. He started wearing his old suits again, the ones he had kept folded away in a suitcase for years. He began to eat in the dining hall with the others. He still had a sharp tongue, but now it was used for witty jokes instead of bitter insults. One rainy Tuesday, Arthur called me into his room. He looked fragile, but his eyes were clear. "Sarah," he said, taking my hand. His skin felt like old silk. "My memory is like a candle in a drafty room. It flickers. Some days I don't know where I am, but today the light is steady. I want to play for them, all of them, one last time." We organized the concert of a lifetime in the main hall. We moved the chairs into a semicircle around the upright piano. I had spent the morning polishing the wood until it glowed. When Arthur walked into the room, the silence was heavy with respect. He sat at the bench, adjusted his cuffs, and looked at the crowd. He looked at the residents in their wheelchairs, the nurses in their scrubs, and the tired families visiting their loved ones. He didn't use sheet music. He didn't need it. He played a medley of his greatest works. But he ended with that simple, haunting 3-note phrase I had heard him hum months ago. This time he didn't stop. He built a bridge of melody around those 3 notes, turning the question into an answer. It was a song of forgiveness, for the world, for the accident, and for himself. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. When the last note faded, he sat in silence for a long time, his hands resting gently on the keys. He looked up at me and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." 2 days later, Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep. He left behind a small envelope addressed to me. Inside was the yellowed newspaper clipping from London and a handwritten note. "You heard the music when I was only making noise. Thank you for listening. I still work at St. Jude's. The piano is still in the hall. Sometimes when the night shift is long and the air is heavy with the smell of lemon cleaner, I sit on that bench and touch the keys." Arthur taught me that anger is often just a shield for a broken heart. Behind every difficult person, there is a story buried by time, pain, and the fear of being forgotten. In our lives and in our journey to learn a new language, we often feel like Arthur did. Frustrated, stuck, or unable to find the right words. We feel like we are only making noise. But if we have patience with ourselves, and if we listen closely to others, the music eventually returns. Everyone deserves to be seen beyond their pain. Everyone deserves to be heard. If Arthur's story touched your heart today, please leave a comment below. Have you ever judged someone before knowing their story? Or perhaps you have a Sarah in your life who helped you find your voice again? I would love to read your reflections. If you enjoyed learning English through this emotional journey, please hit the like button and subscribe to Study English TV. It helps us share more stories of human dignity and resilience with learners all over the world. Thank you for listening, and remember, your story matters.